We begin with Prime Minister Mark Carney's indication a deal with the United States may still have a notable downside for Canada. He spoke to reporters ahead of a meeting with his cabinet this morning, saying this in French.
There's not a lot of evidence right now. And with regards to negotiations, for any country or any jurisdiction to have a tariff-free agreement.
The Prime Minister there asked if there was a sense he could get a deal without tariffs, saying there's not a lot of evidence for that. With more on this, the CBC's Ashley Burke joins me now. So, Ashley, tell us more about the Prime Minister's comments today.
Well, Catherine, I was outside the Prime Minister's office this morning when he briefly stopped and made that comment, and it really was the clearest indication that we've seen so far from the Prime Minister that he doesn't think that Trump is willing to give out deals and reach deals with countries without some sort of tariffs in place. And that seems to be a shift in the goalpost, at least publicly, because before that he'd been saying he wanted a good deal for Canada. Prior to that, he said he wanted all tariffs lifted, and his chief negotiator and ambassador to Washington was saying that that was the goal for this deal all the way up until Canada Day. So we have seen that shift publicly, perhaps to lower expectations. I spoke to an international trade negotiator, a trade lawyer, who said that it is true what Carney is saying, that there have not been deals reached with any countries without some sort of baseline tariff. And he said the prime example of that is the UK. This is a country that the U.S. has a trade surplus with, and they still have a 10% baseline tariff in effect with their deal. And he suggested that Carney is really trying to reset expectations. Take a listen.
He floated a trial balloon for Canadians and Canadian businesses, basically saying, here's what this looks like. Is this okay if there's a baseline tariff that sticks? If Canadian businesses and Canadians in general say, no, all tariffs have to be removed absolutely unconditionally, then that's far more difficult and probably means that Canada would have to offer a lot more at the table.
And we're starting to see some reaction. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre posted on social media not long ago, taking aim at Carney, saying that it's another concession from someone he says that said he would never back down to the U.S. president.
Certainly a part of this, Ashley, is politics, as you indicate, but there's an important economic element here in terms of how the economy is doing, people's jobs. What sort of industry reaction have we been seeing? And
we're starting to see how this is going over with them. I spoke to the steel industry. They are hard hit by Trump's tariffs, 50%. And when I spoke to them, they said, look, they don't want to see any sort of baseline tariff in effect. And here's how they responded to Mr. Carney's comments today.
I think the Prime Minister is actually, unfortunately, I think he's being realistic. I would agree, we're not seeing a lot of evidence of, at this moment in time, of the U.S. President's, willingness to proceed without tariffs on anybody. Obviously, the steel sector is facing dire consequences as a result of a 50% tariff, and that needs to be dealt with. But we also don't want a bad deal for Canada.
She says if that 50% tariff doesn't change, that the industry cannot survive over time in the way that we see it right now. She has new numbers that show that in May, across the country, steel production was down 30%. That's when the 25% tariff was in place, so she expects the numbers to be far worse in June. And she said they're seeing layoffs, they're seeing things being scaled back, and that it cannot go on. In an interview on the phone with BBC, Trump did suggest that he's ready to reach some sort of a deal with Canada. But when I asked the Prime Minister this morning, is a deal within reach by August 1st, he would only say that he believes that discussions are going to intensify between now and then.
Already feel pretty intense at this point, Ashley, but thank you very much for bringing us up to speed, the CBC's Ashley Burke. Well, for more on this, we've got a member of the Prime Minister's Council on Canada-U.S. Relations. Stephen McNeil is a former Premier of Nova Scotia. Hi there, Stephen McNeil. I'm wondering, we were hearing from Ashley there and some of the experts she talked to about the shift in expectations. How does that fit with what you are hearing in your role on the Council about the state of these negotiations?
Well, I think, first of all, just look at history. I think in your interview just before me, talking about no country has been able to escape with tariff. In your lead into this, you had the president talking, very much talking about how much they like revenue, tariffs and the revenue. So I think what the Prime Minister was being real when he's at the negotiating table. The question becomes, How big is that tariff? Is it across our entire economy? Is it sectors of our economy? Which only those at the bargaining table, negotiating table would know the answer to that.
I do want to talk sort of about where the bar is in a moment in terms of numbers and what we know and what Canadians might need to start thinking about. But, you know, members of the Prime Minister's own team, we talked about Ambassador Hillman in the previous conversation, have said the goal was to get all tariffs removed. Was that a realistic goal, given what the landscape looks like, given what the president is saying?
I absolutely believe so. Going into these negotiations, and I'm sure it still is the goal. I'm sure the Prime Minister would like to be the first country to negotiate a trade deal without any tariffs with the United States. What he is saying, though, he feels that might be unlikely. So now how do we begin to negotiate and continue the conversation so that we build some level of reliance or connection with the United States? At the same time, I think the Prime Minister deserves a lot of credit for the work that is going on internally in Canada to build one economy and looking for trading partners around the world. I was pleased to hear Minister Anand talk about Asia. I think it's high time that we continue to build those relationships outside of the United States as we continue to try to build a trade agreement with the U.S. that makes sense for both of us.
You say the Prime Minister deserves credit for much of the work he's doing. At the same time, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre tweeting today that this is, in his words, another unilateral concession on the Prime Minister's part. Do you think that there is some political hurt that comes with this acknowledgement from Canadians who might have hoped that this country could do better?
And we're speculating on what this trade deal will look like. This is pure speculation on Poilievre's part. What I have grown comfort from is that a lot of negotiations are happening at the bargaining table and not on the supper hour news. And I think that's critically important because, as you know, when we get down to the very nitty gritty of these deals, any accusation, any allegation could set them back. And I think it's important that we let the ministers, the Prime Minister and his team, continue this negotiation, and then we can all pass judgment on what the final deal looks like. But until we see that, I think it's nothing more than political rhetoric to talk about and speculate on what the trade deal will look like.
Do you think that the number will be decisive, or is there something more important than that? Like, if we accept the premise that Trump, as he has been saying, I mean, feels like since time immemorial, right? He's tariff man, no more beautiful word in the English language. And that there's to some extent an economic argument, perhaps not an economic argument, but a financial argument that he's making here in terms of, it's a de facto consumption tax in some ways on Americans, right? He's bringing money into government revenues. But if we accept that this is going to happen, latest letter had 35% tariffs for Canada, but then that's perhaps only on goods that aren't CUSMA compliant, which is a fairly small section of goods now. The UK with their 10%, does the number the Prime Minister lands at is that the most important thing, I guess?
Well, I'm not sure he's going to land at a number. I'm still confident that there may be negotiations. There may be parts of our economy that has a tariff, not a broad-based tariff. We at this point, we don't know. The one thing we do know is the President of the United States has a revenue problem, and he's using tariffs to try to solve that revenue problem. The question becomes what kind of a deal can we as a country, his largest trading partner, negotiate with him? And I think that's where the process is. At the same time, I would also say to you that I think as we embark on our own internal economic future, as we start looking at these nation-building projects, we need to look at the parts of our economy that have been impacted the most. You talked about steel and aluminum. We need to make sure that we ensure that Canadian fabricators are big parts of these projects. There's a big chunk of employment within those sectors. I think there's ways that we can help deal with some of the things, as the Prime Minister likes to say, we can control what's in our own hands. And these are things that I think the Prime Minister can do. The cabinet can do as they continue to deal with the president as he continues to shift the goalposts. But I'm confident that the Prime Minister and his team will end up with a deal that we as Canadians can live with.
Are you saying that if indeed there are sort of ongoing sectoral implications, that that news has to go hand in hand with programs that are going to help sort of level things off for these industries? Because if we don't know what the end looks like in sight of tariffs, like what do the future of those industries look like?
Well, I think there's multiple things happening at once here. So we are negotiating a trade deal that the Prime Minister and his team are looking to have a tariff-free trade deal, quite frankly. We also need to understand what the details are of the president when he starts talking about tariffs and where does that fit within our current trade deal. But on the other side of that, we're also talking about nation-building projects. And I think those projects need to include major parts of our economy that have been impacted, not just, by the president's tariffs, but by the rhetoric that's gone on that has slowed down projects, even when he's pulled back. And we need to make sure that those sectors, the fabricators in this country, will be a big part of helping Canada build these nation-building projects. I think those two things can happen at the same time. As the Prime Minister and his team continues to build towards trade agreements outside of our country.
I can see how that's relevant for steel and aluminum. But what other, are you envisioning? First, there's a possibility the pharmaceutical sector is going to get hit. The auto sector, how far can we really go?
Well, I think that's when we need to know what that number looks like. Mm-hmm. But I think what we need to put in our mindset is that we need to build in the Canadian economy. And part of that is making sure that we buy Canadian, that we end up, and that just doesn't mean our steel. That means people who are putting it together and fabricated, whether it's bridges that we're doing or infrastructure that's going to be built, whether it's hydroelectricity dams, whether it is transmission across our country to connect our country through energy projects. The aluminum used in those projects can be Canadian product. Will the government be able to answer every issue that's going to be impacted by this? I think they're going to make an effort, but we're all going to be impacted. That's why it is critical to continue to diversify our economy. I think the Prime Minister said that during the campaign, and he said it every day since. We need one Canadian economy, and we need to go out into the world and diversify our trade arrangements. And that's what they're doing. And we're trying to deal with a president who, from one day to the next, moves the goalpost. I think as we let those things happen at the bargaining table, I think we'll get to a better resolution than if we continue to try to negotiate this in public.
I do want to ask you just one more thing before we let you go, Stephen McNeil, which is the Prime Minister has also said there will only be a deal if it's in Canada's best interest. Knowing what we know now, and I appreciate your point throughout this interview has been that is finite. How confident are you that there is going to be a deal, be it August 1st or, I don't even know that we want to put a timeline on it at this point. But do you think Canada and the U.S. will reach a deal, or can you really foresee a scenario where this is just too messy and we have to go forward without a deal?
I believe there's a deal to be had. I believe they can come to an arrangement, but ultimately that will come down to a decision by the Prime Minister and his team, whether or not the deal that they have at the table is good enough for them, good enough for our country. But I do believe there's a deal there, and I believe that's the premise of these negotiations. And I think with the fact, and I can't stress this enough, having been on the sides of whether it's been labor bargaining or trying to create negotiations, when it moves away from the table and becomes out in the public, it becomes very difficult to reach an arrangement. And I think the Prime Minister deserves a lot of credit and his team for so far keeping this at the bargaining table and working towards what should be a deal that's in the positive interest for Canadians.
Yeah, at the bargaining table, though, a table that Donald Trump seems to want to try to flip over as often as he can.
It is, but you know what? Let him flip it once in a while and let him get away with it. We shouldn't react to everything he does. Ultimately, what we want to get to is a deal. And sometimes in negotiations, people try different things. They do things to try to get a reaction out of the people they're negotiating with. And our job is to stay focused at the table, deliver on behalf of Canadians, and make sure this trade deal works for all of us.
Okay. We appreciate your time and your insights today. Thank you very much, Stephen McNeil, a member of the Prime Minister's Council on Canada-U.S. Relations. So what is the best that Canada can get from a deal with the United States? Let's talk about it with the Power Panel. Michelle Cadario was Deputy Chief of Staff to former Prime Minister Paul Martin. Here with me in studio, Kate Harrison, a Conservative political analyst, and Matthew Dubé, a former NDP MP. Welcome, everyone. Kate, I want to start with you. It is a fact that other countries are not getting deals that don't include tariffs at this point. Was this the inevitable conclusion of where things were going to land for Canada?
I'm getting very confused, Catherine, about where to put my elbows. They're up and they're down, and if they keep moving that way, we're going to look like a bunch of chickens. The Prime Minister has an expectation management problem. You referenced it off the top. He billed himself during the election as the guy that would get a good deal for Canada, and the reality is that our tariffs are higher today than they were on election day. We had the doubling of the steel and aluminum tariff. We now have this August 1st threat. So we don't appear to be closer to a deal than we were on election day. And that is a problem for the Prime Minister because he billed himself as the guy to get it done. So what can Canada be doing if tariffs are the reality and other countries have them as their reality? What are we doing to systemically make investment in Canada better? So far, the proposal has been to expedite energy projects to, 2 years, while other jurisdictions are moving faster than that. The U.S. is changing things like their corporate tax rate, or they're at least looking at systems to attract more business investment, and that's totally absent the tariff conversation. So we seem to be very focused on, how we might tax bourbon and ketchup a little bit more to hit back against the Americans and not addressing some of the big challenges that exist for Canada's economy to thrive.
You do say we do not appear to be any closer to a deal. I think we have to acknowledge, and it's something we heard a few times during this show, we just don't know what's happening behind closed doors with negotiations. We may well be closer to a deal. We may not. No one.
Part of the challenge I would observe is that it's been the Prime Minister that has been setting deadlines that the U.S. seemingly is not abiding by. We had this conversation about an agreement to agree around the G7 within 30 days. Then that got moved to July 21st. Now it's looking like August 1st that ostensibly something could happen. And the U.S. are certainly not the ones setting these deadlines. So again, the Prime Minister
the August 1st does seem to have been set by the President.
So was the 30 days exiting the G7. So my point is that the Prime Minister is the one that has raised expectations, and now he is having a difficult time meeting the expectations that he has set.
Matthew?
Well, Kate went with elbows, and I'll go with the banker suit, which seems to fold more like a cheap suit these days. I think, we don't know what's going on behind closed doors. I appreciate that. But I think the appearance is that we're conceding a lot more than we're actually gaining. At the end of the day, a lot has been made about Trump's dislike of former Prime Minister Trudeau, Minister Freeland, and even to the point where he, and some of his officials threw tantrums in light of Minister Freeland's sort of hard-headedness in some cases. And yet they seem to have gotten a better deal at the time than it looks like we might get now. And I think that's part of the concern that exists here. We keep hearing about CUSMA compliance, but what does that look like now? There seems to be some confusion about that. And what will that look like after this deal is even more uncertain. So, the DST, regardless of what one thinks of the policy, seems to have been a concession made just to bring them back to the table, so almost in a vacuum. And meanwhile, the tariffs on steel and aluminum and others are still in place. And then domestically, I think there's concerns as well. One is we've conceded a lot in terms of domestic policy. So you look at this border bill that's before the House of Commons now, that seems to have Trojan horse lawful access, so far beyond what the president was even asking for. And then what are we doing for workers, right? People have lost their jobs and are suffering right now because of tariffs that are currently in place. There was no budget in the spring, and yet that situation continues to be pervasive, and no help seems to be in sight for those individuals.
Michelle, I got a laundry list of concerns from your co-panelists there. What do you say to them?
Well, they're raising a lot of very valid issues, without question. I would point to the fact that, right now, Canada is the least tariffed country with respect to Trump than anyone except for Mexico. And, no one thought that dealing with Trump was going to be easy. Nor did he promise that this was going to be a deal without any kind of tariffs. What he has always said is that he's going to try and get the best deal for Canada, and he's not signing a deal until it is the best deal for Canada that can be done. So I'm not sure that there has been any advantage to the two early signers of the 190 countries that he's currently, got up in the air and flying off letters to or anything like that. I think that no, there's a lot of weight on the Prime Minister's shoulders, and everyone is right. There are high expectations. And I think that there's only so much that's going to be able to get done in terms of some kind of a deal with the U.S. And I think we probably all agree that whatever is signed, how long that piece of paper is actually, that Mr. Trump is going to uphold it, is anyone's guess. So I think that what the Prime Minister is also talking about is on the other side, what we can do to build the Canadian economy, what we can do for investments. He has brought in a bill that had broad party support certainly from the Conservatives as well, to fast-track projects. That hasn't been done in Canada. It's, not going to be without hurdles even bringing that through, but there's an opportunity now for real investment, for defense spending that's focused here in Canada, to try and use that to help to stimulate the economy, to build housing. And, and I think that the other thing that I would say is that the workers haven't been forgotten. That tariff money has been earmarked for displaced workers. And I think that remains top of mind. But I'm not going to pretend that all of the solutions and it's going to be easy and that there's some kind of a magic brush that Mark Carney or anybody else is going to be able to do. I think it's about being realistic and about trying to get the best deal. And I think Canadians have confidence that our Prime Minister is the best person to get that for us.
Kate, do you think that there is a scenario where the Prime Minister can say, okay, yes, there are tariffs, but this is basically the best deal in the world, or comparable to the best deals in the world? Or is the criticism going to be, regardless, from the Prime Minister's political opponents? You said you were going to try to get a deal with no tariffs, and you didn't pull it off. You should have done something that other countries have not thus far been able to do.
I think there would need to be a really solid foundation of what Canada is doing or has done to help diversify the economy, to help offset the fact that tariffs may be here to stay, or at least as long as this president is in place. So, when the proposal or the counter proposal from Canada is, yes, we're going to fast track development within a 2-year time frame, the question is, are we moving fast enough? To Michelle's point on support for workers, there's increasingly little money available to actually be able to finance this. Yes, there's some tariff funds earmarked for that, but there's no longer the capital gains tax revenue. There's no longer the DST revenue. There's no longer the consumer price on carbon revenue.
But those are all policies that Conservatives were happy to say goodbye to.
Absolutely, yeah. But we are also increasing spending. So at a time when we're really hamstrung in our ability to get a solid deal done with the U.S., we're trying to advance these projects. We ought to be looking at ways that we can incentivize more investment. There's increasingly little resources left for the government to be able to do that, because all of these things together, these failed policies at the outset, aren't going to deliver the revenue that I think they were banking on when they made some of these other commitments.
Okay. Matthew, your take on what the future should look like if Mark Carney is going to ultimately say to Canadians, yes, there's a deal, but it's not this no tariff situation we might have hoped for.
Well, Kate and I might disagree on the need for speed, if you will, and because we've seen some of the consequences of that, and how Indigenous communities in some parts of the country have responded, but that's, I don't want to downplay those considerations, but I think where we would agree is on the destination, right? Like, something needs to be done now, whether that's providing support or going in a different direction. And to me, that's what was talked about and promised in the election campaign. And the Prime Minister said it again today in the clip that you played as we were coming on, where he talked about the commercial reality has changed, but nothing actually seems to have changed. We're still behaving the way we would have 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago vis-a-vis the U.S. And then domestically, I hope you don't mind my saying this, Kate, we were talking off air about the cost of living problem is still in the back of all this, right? The backdrop. And we got the inflation numbers for last month. We're starting to see the impacts of tariffs. Some of that stuff's going to start coming to a head again. I think there's the honeymoon politically after the election, but when people start realizing that a lot of these things haven't really changed and we're still dealing with this, belligerent actor south of the border, some decisions are going to have to be made. And I don't think that asking ministers to do drastic cuts that would have made Stephen Harper blush of 7.5% in each department is what your solution is. I think there needs to be something more and something that'll support people. And I don't think that we're seeing that right now. I appreciate the desire to be realistic, but you also need to be reassuring. And I don't think that that's what that is.
Michelle, specifically about the question of the deadline, Kate was bringing that up earlier, that it has been a shifting deadline, but ultimately that it was Mark Carney's decision, right? He said deadlines focus the mind. I spoke to Pierre Poilievre on the House on Friday, and he said he felt the deadline was a mistake, that it gave the Americans an advantage because Canada had set a clock for itself that the Americans did not feel bound by. What do you make of that?
Well, that's a view, but I think that I would share Mark Carney's view that by actually putting some kind of a time frame in, it does actually get the attention of the Americans who, again, they're trying to do like 150 deals at the same time. And, we don't want to be kind of down at the bottom of the pile. We're their biggest trading partner. And I think that that's why he wanted to put some urgency behind this, but also because he really wants to try and bring some certainty to Canadians. But I'll remind you, and as I said earlier, all along he has said he's not signing a deal to have for the sake of a deal. Mm-hmm. He will sign a deal that he thinks is in the best interest of Canada, and that's the best deal that we can get. So in that way, he doesn't have a time frame where his signature actually has to go down on a piece of paper. He is just trying to actually channel and somehow, work with the Trump administration in a way that kind of focuses the mind. Then you've got loaded on top of that all of these different kinds of deadlines and dates that Mr. Trump throws out. That is ever changing, and that is, a certain number of days on one industry and then another number of days on another industry, and it is it's hard to keep up. And so I think that what they were just trying to do again is focus them in so that we're not to try and insulate us, if there's any way possible, from all of that chaos when Mr. Trump is talking about industry by industry tariffs. So, we'll see if his strategy was right and what actually comes about in the next few weeks.
Kate, I do find this question of the possibility of not having a deal at the end of this a very interesting one because of course, I mean, the basic logic of what Mark Carney is saying, we're not going to sign a deal that's bad for Canada. I think that's difficult to argue with. Yeah. And yet the political reality of this moment is that there has been such focus and pressure on a deal. Can play this out for me? There's no deal come August 1st and it doesn't seem like there's going to be. Is that conceivable?
It is conceivable that there would be no deal on August 1st. I think Canadians have extended a considerable amount of goodwill during this honeymoon period to the Prime Minister. Mm-hmm. Polling suggests that they still believe that he's the right person to get that done. That goodwill will start to evaporate the longer we go, and the more that affordability concerns and inflation concerns start to come back into focus, because these things are linked. And if the Prime Minister is viewed as ineffectual on tariffs and trade and negotiation with Trump, that is probably going to cloud Canadians' views on how they think the Prime Minister is performing in those other areas.
We just have about, I think, 30 seconds or so left here, Matthew, but no deal. Is that a conceivable political reality from where you're standing?
Well, I think the things are kind of contradictory because the concessions seem to have been made so quickly, right? Like the decision on the DST, I understand that the collection date was coming up and that's why they had to make that decision. But when you're doing that stuff so quickly, it seems that you want to get a deal quickly, whereas if you know you're willing to stretch out the timeline, then why not be more combative? Because I do think that that's what Canadians were looking for in the last election.
Yeah, it is a fascinating process to watch from the amount that we are about to able to see, but a lot of questions about where it's going from here. I appreciate everybody's perspective today. Thank you very much to our power panel. That's Michelle Caderio, Kate Harrison, and Matthew Dubé.